Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Hey everyone, welcome back to Your Home by Design. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects how we feel in our homes more than what we might realize: color. Specifically, how to mix and match colors and create a cohesive color scheme throughout your space. We'll talk about why this matters, how it affects our mood and well-being, and I'll share some practical tips to make your home feel more harmonious through color. Let's get into it. So have you ever wondered why choosing paint colors is so hard? For most people, there are a few key things that make it feel so hard. There's the influence of popularity. If certain colors are trending and you see it enough, you might start to be influenced by it. You might want to try it out, but you're not entirely sure if it would work. Or it might be the sheer amount of choices. There are so many choices when it comes to picking paint colors and pairing them together. And creating a color scheme. You know, I know Benjamin Moore has over 3,500 colors you can choose from. So yes, there are literally thousands of color choices. And then of course, there's the fear and uncertainty behind it. Right? I'm sure you like certain colors, but aren't sure how they'll look in your room or how they'll work with what you already have or how they'll work together. So that fear of committing, going forward with it, and then it not being right. Years ago, I remember talking to a friend who had gone through a bit of a refresh, a small renovation, and she was telling me about when she was selecting paint colors and the whole process and the whole chaotic experience of that. And what happened for her was she had these inspiration images that she had collected, and she had a sort of idea of what colors she wanted in the room. But she was all excited and feeling really motivated to select these colors. This one day she went to the paint store, and if you've ever been to the paint store and you walk to the back and there's this sort of white wall there with all the swatches, like hundreds of swatches just staring at you. And she just sort of started pulling a few colors, and she's like, "Ooh, I really like these ones." And then all of a sudden she started grabbing more colors. And she said she literally left that paint store with like 100 different color swatches. And it was this big pile in her hand. And she said that, you know, she went in with all this excitement and this anticipation. And then she left just really feeling kind of scattered and really unmotivated. And what it came down to, and I was explaining this to her, was really what she was doing was kind of ignoring some key factors that would help her with this decision process, and simply just going off of how she felt in the moment, and wasn't really checking it back to some of her inspiration images and some of the intentions that she set out for. But she was missing a few other key things that would have really helped her in that process, so that she wouldn't have walked out of there feeling overwhelmed with a handful of paint swatches. Today, I want to give you a bit of a strategy. I want to give you some blinders. And by that, I mean like a horse, okay? So if you can picture a horse with those little blinders on either side of their eyes, you know, they use these for horses to keep them from getting distracted. It eliminates the visual noise, and it helps them stay the course and run the race and not get spooked and all of those things. So that's what I want for you today. Because color is tricky, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It is complex. Color can do wonders for us personally, as well as our spaces. It can also do the opposite if it's not done somewhat correctly. And a cohesive color scheme in a home does more than just look aesthetically pleasing. It has profound psychological and emotional effects on us. So before I give you the blinders, I want to explain why it matters and how it benefits us. So something I've talked about before, you've probably heard me say this, but our brains prefer order and repetition. So when we're looking at a color scheme that flows, it feels more intentional and it puts you immediately at ease. If the scheme is disjointed and it's lacking that sort of cohesion, then it can actually cause you to feel unsettled. And this is how we are just reacting to the space almost instantly. When you walk into that room, your eyes are scanning the room and your brain is doing the visual processing, looking for that order and that repetition. And if you're viewing a cohesive flowing scheme, you're immediately going to feel at ease. And I'll explain what makes a scheme cohesive in a minute. When you are in a cohesive scheme, you can relax. Your brain can relax. It's not having to make a lot of sense of the space or experience any sensory overload. So if you're experiencing sensory overload in a space, this might be causing you stress. You could be feeling physically stressed while in the room. Now, I think most people won't equate the feelings of being stressed to how their room is affecting them. I'm sure most people would say, if they're in a room and they're feeling stressy, they might say, I'm just tired, or I had a hard day. The usual things that we say when we're feeling stressed. But when you recognize that this might be happening as a result of your room, this is where you can use your home as a tool for better living, get to create a space to enhance mood and emotional well-being. You've heard the term color psychology, no doubt, which is the study of how color affects human mood and behavior. And it's such an interesting topic. So for instance, cool colors can help to calm us. Warm tones can energize us, and using a well-balanced color scheme can actually support emotional stability. Red has effects on us. It can increase our heart rate. It can even affect how our sweat glands react. Colors can change all sorts of things. It can affect our body temperature, our blood pressure, and even our respiration. So how does a cohesive color scheme affect the aesthetics of a room? What's the impact that you'll notice visually from this? Well, it can make a room feel more spacious. It can allow a room to feel intentional, more curated, deliberate, better designed, which just enhances your overall enjoyment of the room, right? So feeling connected to your space through color helps to reinforce a sense of belonging and comfort. So I had a teacher years ago when I was at design school, and she was amazing. Her ability to teach color and just her approach, like she had this very specific technique to teach color and undertones. And undertones was a really big thing. That was kind of what I took from the course anyway, was like, this was her goal. Her goal was to get us to really be able to see undertones and to be able to work with them, or to neutralize them, or to bring them out, or whatever it was. She wanted us to have the ability to see undertones. Like, she stressed that a lot. And I remember when I first started taking her course, and to be fair, I didn't have that initial ability to see those undertones right away. She would test the class and see, like, what do you think this undertone is? What do you think that undertone is? And, and you could see that there were some people that they got to the answer very quickly, and others didn't, and others it took a bit of time. For me personally, I would say, it took a little bit of time. It took practice. It took working with schemes before I really developed an eye to see undertones. And I only say this to you because if you're trying to pull a scheme together and you're just not seeing those undertones right away and you're not quite sure how to get them to work together, just have patience and keep working with that scheme. Walk away from it and come back to it. Just have patience and take some time. Recently, I read this article on something called metamerism. And what that term means simply is when two colors appear the same to our eye, but they're actually different. They have different wavelengths. So the article described a technique to identify counterfeit money. And it was done in 1985, and they used a Dutch banknote. And on the banknote, there was 2 green inks. So under normal lighting, the banknote looked uniform in color. So I imagine it was more of a solid green. And then when you placed the banknote under a red light, a bunny appeared. So, and I imagine, they used one green to create the bunny, and then another green to sort of fill in a background. So our eyes saw it as, or would see it as, a solid, yet it was not. The bunny was, came to life under a red light. And I share this story because metamerism is fascinating, but I think that it demonstrates how complex color can be in different light sources. Whenever I'm working through a color scheme and we're down to say like the final selections, right? There may be like 3 colors that we're testing with the scheme, like paint colors. So I'll actually request that those colors get painted on the wall in large swatches in various locations in the room. And I want to be able to stand in the corner of the room so that I can see the paint swatch in the adjacent room. I want to be able to see how the paint swatch is playing on the room with the adjacent rooms. I want to see how the tones are reacting and interacting and playing off of the natural light as well as the artificial light. I'll look at it at different times of day to see how it's changing, how it's relating to the other colors. And during these observations, I'll actually have on hand the fabric scheme and all the materials that are going into this space or that are being considered for the space. And so, and the reason why is so that I can actually see how the materials are playing off of the proposed colors. So for instance, if there's built-in millwork, let's say with stone or tile running up the wall or a concrete fireplace, these materials will be on hand because I want to see how it's all working together. Okay. Just so you know, those swatches that go on the wall, I mean, you can buy swatches that you just stick to the wall, but I personally, the ones that I've had in the past, I've found them to be too small. So I much prefer when the swatch is painted on the wall and it's quite a large swatch, like a 3x3. The painters aren't always happy with me, but it is a very effective way to make sure you're getting that color right, because color is so amazing. And I've had certain paint colors painted on the wall, like the swatch painted, and they have completely come to life in the space. And then I've also had colors that just disappear. I may have initially pulled the color in an office, and then when I've brought it to site and had it painted on the wall, it just reads completely differently. And you know what? There's nothing better than feeling like, yes, this is the right color for the space, and you can see all the colors coming together and it's cohesive, and that scheme just starts to kind of come to life. So on that note, I want to give you some of those blinders, getting back to the horse story, on how to keep you on course. So let's get into 5 things that you can do to help during the selection stage. But before we get into it, I just want to explain what a cohesive color scheme is, right? Simply put, a cohesive color scheme is a group of colors that work well together. Their grouping creates a harmonious feel to the space. So number 1 is start with identifying how you want the space to impact you. What impact do you want from that room? Do you have habits that you want to create, or do you have habits that you want to change? Do you need to feel energized when you're in the room, or do you want to have focus and clarity when you're using that space? These types of things guide your color choices, right? So to identify these things first is really, really important, because that's going to give you a guideline for where to go next. Number 2 is to determine the unchangeables. So when I say unchangeables, I'm referring to anything in your space that's not being changed. Okay. Anything that's staying, you have to factor these things in. So for instance, do you have hardwood floors and you're keeping them, you're redoing everything else in the space, but you are keeping those hardwood floors? Well, what's the undertone of those hardwood floors? If they're red, and I love using red flooring as an example, because I often find that people either love it or they wish that they didn't have a red undertone, because essentially if you're working with red undertones, you'll have to decide if you're going to work with them or if you're going to try to go against them. So you're going to try to neutralize that red. So if you're building, say, a green color scheme and you want to neutralize the red, then you could be making a mistake, because green and red actually complement one another. And then that red is going to actually look even redder. In this case, you'd want to build a scheme that perhaps is more blues or grays or taupes. But again, watch for that undertone, because if blue has like a green undertone, then when it's next to that red floor, it's going to look more of like a blue-green. Okay. So if you work with those swatches, you'll get a good sense of how the colors are being affected by those unchangeables. And keep in mind that an unchangeable can be in a room that isn't actually visually connected, but you may want to run the paint color throughout the spaces, right? So it's going to go into the other rooms. So you then have to factor in the tones that are unchangeable in the other rooms. So you've determined your unchangeables, which gives you some more direction. Number 3 is to determine how many colors you want to have, either in a single room or throughout your home. So this is really about layering colors into the space. So you'd start with a base color, and this is more or less the foundation. This is the largest amount of color that you see throughout the space. And this is on walls or a large piece of furniture or your flooring. And then secondary colors are found in things like rugs and drapery and upholstery, or just textiles in general. And these are the secondary colors are your sort of supporting colors to the base color. And then you have your accent colors, and the accent colors are found in any sort of like decor or art or really any unexpected kind of accent. And the accent colors can be changed up throughout a home. So this is a good way that you can distinguish rooms, right? So if you have one unifying paint color throughout, each room might have different secondary colors and different accent colors. But I will say that you want to sort of limit the palette. You don't want to go crazy here with too many colors. You want to stick between like 3 and 5 colors that really work well together. And always consider those undertones, right? Because, ensuring that the undertones are consistent across all of the materials and everything going in. So your furniture and your paint and your accent and your art and all of that. And then something that you may have heard of is it's a rule, which is the 60-30-10 rule. So it's basically what percentage that you're kind of distributing throughout the room. But I would say that, this is kind of a good thing to fall back on when you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you're just really not sure, if you've kind of gotten off track a bit. You can come back to this, but I wouldn't say, that you have to stick to this. This isn't something that it's not a rigid rule that you have to stick to. If you're feeling comfortable and you're feeling okay with building your scheme, by all means, ignore the 60-30-10 rule. But if you are feeling a little bit of that overwhelm and just lacking confidence, then this could be a really good thing to do. Yeah. And I will say with accent colors, like you really do want to avoid them feeling matchy in a room. When things are overly done, that's where a room can kind of fall flat, and it just doesn't have that sense of personality and interesting aesthetic, and doesn't have any elements of surprise and awe and all of that. So just be sparing with the accent colors, and always try to do a bit of interest, right? You want something unexpected to happen, and this can be done in subtle ways with color. And I just want to point out that when you're finalizing on the amount of colors, during this process, you'll have to really identify what is staying, right? So if you already have a rug or a sofa or pieces of art that you're going to use in the space, these are often your jumping off point. Number 4 is to start with the least. So as I mentioned earlier, there are so many paint colors to choose from. So it's best practice to actually start with the things where you have the least amount of choices. You have the least amount of options. So soft furnishings and rugs, these are great places to start. If you narrow down the options, some stores will actually allow you to borrow a rug and test it in your space. Some you can purchase a swatch, which is so helpful. Furniture you can typically get a swatch, or if you're having one reupholstered, you can get a fabric book from the upholsterer and bring it home with you and go through those fabrics, having them all on hand at the same time. If you can decide on these, then it makes it a lot easier when pulling a paint color, right? Again, this is giving you those blinders. But the reason why, and like I said, is there are over 3,500 different paint colors, and you might only have 5 colors that you can choose from for your. So it's always best to choose the best color for your sofa first, and then you have a whole bunch of options for paint. Yes, doing this will definitely help to narrow down your choices for the paint color. It all works together. You start with the least, and then that least is going to inform all of the paint colors, and that's going to narrow that down a lot so that it makes it a lot easier to choose from those 3,500. 100 paint colors. Number 5 is, gather your inspiration, but don't go crazy. Okay. I think that inspiration can be such an amazing jumping off point. It can get you excited. It can kind of motivate you and inspire you to make changes and let you feel like you have a plan, but it can also really overwhelm you. So if you're choosing too much and you're looking at so much inspiration, it's actually going to have the opposite effect. The first thing you always want to do is to determine what you need from that room. How do you want it to make you feel when you're in that space? How often do you plan to use the room? Because this will inform what you want out of your time when you're spending it in the room. Okay, so inspiration is great, but it doesn't always provide you with what you need or even what you can achieve for your space. And that's really important because you don't want to end up getting fixated on inspiration and then just feeling like you can't achieve this look, when in reality, that look may not be right for you. Use inspiration as a bit of a guide, but don't get fixated and try not to overwhelm yourself with too much. The last thing I'll say today is just trust your taste, okay? Trust your beautiful, authentic self. You want to create a space for the life you have and the life that you want to live. You want your space to mirror back your life. You want to live in spaces you love and spaces that love you back. Your home should be authentically yours, okay? That's how you know you've created a perfect color scheme. It's not only complementing everything in it, but most importantly, it complements you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the Support the Show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.